With millions of Americans now living abroad and over 100,000 moving to Europe each year, it begs the question, what sacrifices do Americans actually make when they choose Europe? And more importantly, which of those sacrifices are so tough that eventually send people back to the US? I want to walk you through the big ones, the ones that we've dealt with ourselves, the ones that friends and family have struggled with, and the ones that you, our viewers, tell us about in the comments, emails, and DMs. Now, these aren't ranked in any particular order, but we have grouped them into clusters with a few ideas for solutions. And if you'd like to jump around like House of Pain, we've dropped chapters in the video so that you can hop to whatever hits home for you. So let's kick things off with the major lifestyle trade-offs Americans typically face. Here's the first thing you need to wrap your head around when Americans move from the US. Many, not all, but many, are relocating from spacious suburban style living into historic European cities where space is at a premium. Whether it's price, availability, or simply the reality of century-old construction, things get tighter fast. Your neighbors aren't just close. Sometimes it feels like they're right on top of you. Size of housing is one of the biggest shocks. Some Americans genuinely want to downsize, while others say that they do, right up until they walk into a 2-bedroom apartment that's under 850 square feet, about 79 square meters. And suddenly, they're questioning every life choice that brought them here. Take our place in Porto. We're building a 3-bedroom unit that's going to be around 140 square meters. When Kalie's parents walked through it, her dad kept saying how small it felt, and he wasn't sure if all the furniture would fit. Meanwhile, when our non-American friends walk in, they go, "Holy sh! This apartment is huge." Manny's coming at it from a 4,500 square foot landed home in Central Florida, literally 3 times the size of this city apartment. So of course it's gonna feel small to him. And speaking of landed homes, that leads to the bigger sacrifice, space in general. A lot of Americans moving abroad are coming from houses with big yards. Some are thrilled to say goodbye to mowing and weed eating forever, but others message us asking if we know any apartments in the city with a garden and a view. The reality is you can't have it all. If you want a private garden, it's almost certainly on the ground floor, which means that the chances of having sweeping views drops basically to 0. And when a unit with a garden does come up, well, the price reflects the fantasy everyone else has too. That little patch of grass becomes prime real estate. But space issues don't stop at housing or yards. The US offers giant shopping aisles, sprawling parks, drive-throughs for everything, massive parking garages, and parking spaces that you could practically land a plane on. And that brings us to the next thing, cars. Many Americans are used to gas-guzzling SUVs, trucks, and big full-size cars. In Europe, you'll mostly see smaller, more compact cars and SUVs. Trucks are almost always work vehicles, not a fashion statement or a personality type. Luckily, a lot of Americans who move abroad are excited to ditch their cars and use public transportation, something that they might not have access to in the US. But if you want a car, just know the trade-offs. You'll likely pay more for the same model than you would in the States. You may have to drive something smaller than you're used to. And if you insist on a bigger vehicle, well, good luck squeezing it down the medieval streets into parking spots clearly designed for horses rather than vehicles. And don't forget, gas is sold by the liter, and it's significantly more expensive than the US. So keep that in the back of your mind too. Okay, shifting gears. Pun absolutely intended. We're still in the lifestyle sacrifice category, but we need to talk more about medical convenience, not medical quality, because the quality in much of Europe is excellent. What Americans really sacrifice is immediacy. In some European countries, a 24-hour pharmacy is practically mythical, like spotting a unicorn with a lab coat. And when it comes to healthcare, the limitation isn't the care itself, it's the speed. Longer wait times, fewer specialists available at the snap of a finger, limited urgent care options, and no walk-in anything, anytime model like you have in parts of the US. Fortunately for us in Porto, when we've needed something done medically, we've usually managed it within a 15-minute walk of our go-to hospital, thanks to Unilabs. Tests, scans, whatever. It's been surprisingly smooth. But we're fully aware this isn't the case everywhere across Europe. A lot of this ties into the major timetable differences. For example, we were in Graz this summer. We arrived just after 12 noon on a Saturday. Kalie felt a cold coming on, so we dropped our bags off the hotel, we hit the streets looking for a pharmacy. And what did we find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It turns out that pharmacies in that region shut their doors at midday on Saturday and don't open up again until Monday morning. That was a huge shock, even for us. Timetable differences like these can take a long time to adjust to. Some people eventually embrace it. Others push through the shock phase, adjust for a while, and then later reject the idea that anything should ever be closed when they want it. But these differences go beyond pharmacies and shops. They spill right into meal times. Breakfast and lunch aren't drastically different from typical American times, but dinner can really throw people off. When we lived in Spain, we got used to eating later. Although we still rarely ate as late as our Spanish friends unless we were going to go out with them. Our dinner time was usually around 8 p.m. Now, growing up in the United States, it was 6 p.m. and then maybe as we became adults, it was like 7 p.m. Meanwhile, some of our Spanish friends didn't even think about eating dinner until 9 or 10. For Americans moving to Southern Europe, this can be a real challenge. Those moving to places like Germany or Poland might feel more at home on this front. But a little warning, I've only mentioned dinner. Mornings across Europe also tend to start slower and later than what many Americans are used to, almost everywhere. And going back to the pharmacy example, convenience when shopping isn't just about operating hours. Yes, 24/7 options are almost non-existent, which honestly some would argue is a good thing. But the entire rhythm of shopping is different. Fewer options, fewer giants, more planning. By the way, let me pause here because I want to be clear. I'm not saying any of this to claim that one way of life is better or worse. I'm simply laying out the differences so that you can understand what you're getting yourself into before moving from the US to Europe. And if you're already here, maybe European life fits you like a glove, or maybe you've been here just long enough to start tearing your hair out over the differences. When shopping, you'll quickly notice that places tend to have fewer options. I still remember the first time we came back to the US after living in Spain. Kalie's mom asked us to go pick up some peanut butter at the grocery store. Shout out to Publix. I walked down the peanut butter aisle, yes, an entire aisle of peanut butter, only to find 1.5 million jars staring back at me. Different sizes, different brands, crunchy, smooth, low sugar, high sugar, low salt, no salt, organic, fair trade, vegan, gluten-free, lactose-free. I mean, at some point, you expect to see emotionally supportive peanut butter. In Spain, I had two options, creamy and crunchy, one brand, one size. Shopping was done in 12 seconds flat. Now, another thing that hits you living in Europe, there are far fewer all-in-one shopping destinations, or at least they're not conveniently located for most people. So you'll end up making multiple stops. The bakery, the market, the butcher, the produce shop. Some Americans absolutely love this because they build a relationship with the shop owners and feel more connected to their community. Others miss target. Now here's a big one that Americans consistently talk about, consistently ask us about, and which endlessly confuses Europeans: Mexican food. Where do we get good Mexican food around here? We hear this all the time. And the honest answer is Mexico or the US. Okay, I'm joking, but only a little. Americans have an emotional connection with Mexican food, and it's genuinely hard to replace it in Europe. Most cities have a spot or two where you can get by. If you're picky, let's face it, many Americans are, and your best bet might just be to import spices and seasonings and just commit hard to a taco night at home. Speaking of home, let's talk electronics. Be very aware that your favorite KitchenAid stand mixer should probably stay in the US. Between voltage differences and plug shapes, a lot of American household electronics simply don't work here, even with a converter. Now, in my 20s, I tried to bring my Xbox from the US. I plugged it in and instantly fried the power cord. Amazing smell, terrible outcome. Some devices can be saved with a different power cable, and yes, you can buy a candy red KitchenAid mixer in Europe. It's currently $499.99 on sale at KitchenAid Portugal. This is not an ad. So basically, your muscles for comfort and convenience are gonna get a little workout living in Europe. Not in a bad way, just different. Now let's shift into social and emotional sacrifices, because moving abroad doesn't cut the cord, but it definitely stretches it. Here's the thing. To move abroad successfully, you do have to say goodbye to some friends, but you don't have to say goodbye forever. You'll make new friends in your new country, no question. But you'll also want to stay connected with some of your old friends. The tricky part, it takes two to tango. Maintaining friendships from afar is hard because of time zones, physical distance, and changing life chapters. So let me unpack that. Time zones are obvious. While it's midday to you in Europe and you're in full swing, your friends back in the US might just be getting the kids to school. Retirees? Okay, so not much of a problem. But later, when you're winding down and it's a convenient time to chat, your friends might be juggling dinner prep. Proximity matters too. Out of sight, out of mind. When you're physically distant, you naturally focus on the people you see regularly, and they do the same. And finally, life chapters can drift apart. Living abroad changes you, sometimes profoundly. While friends back home may be stuck in their own routines, this disconnect can make you feel like you no longer understand each other because your lives are moving in different directions. Friendships are so important, and yes, some will inevitably fade. But the ones that matter most, you can maintain them if both sides are actively engaged. Family, on the other hand, is different. You'll lose some connectivity in the same way, but blood is still thicker than water. Still, most Americans end up seeing their family less often, and sacrifices are inevitable. Missing trips to explore Europe in order for summer vacations or Christmases back in the US. Honestly, this is something that my wife and I have grappled with more and more, especially since having a child. Okay, so full disclosure, I'd like to apologize to my sister and of course my niece and nephew for missing so many key milestones. My nephew is a high school senior who just committed to play collegiate baseball, a sport that he has poured himself into the last 8 years, and I've never seen him play a high school game. Little League, sure, but does that even count? Embarrassing, right? On the bright side, there's still time to see our niece in a play. She's a drama queen in the best possible way. Okay, enough of the guilt trip. Here's what reframed things for us, our daughter. Seeing her interact with cousins on both sides of our family really shifted our priorities. We now do less of what we want, like traveling and exploring, and do more of what the family needs, moments together. So there's the sacrifice. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. Move abroad, and you'll inevitably miss big events like births, weddings, and funerals. Or you'll miss big travel adventures in Europe to attend those events. Only you can decide what's worth it. Now, how do we transition away from such a deeply emotional topic? Well, just like this. Let's talk about communication, integration, and identity. And specifically, the one that might sound silly to some, but it's actually a major freakout moment for many. Your phone, better yet, your American phone number. You wouldn't believe how many people write to us insisting they literally can't give up their number. Why? Well, as Nate Bergaze's George Washington from SNL says, nobody knows. But seriously, some people are so attached to their phone numbers, it's like they have Stockholm Syndrome. They're already paying an outrageous amount for their US phone plans, and now they're considering keeping it while living in Europe, just to hold on to their digits. There are services that allow you to keep your US number if you absolutely need it, but ultimately, it's worth the sacrifice to get a European number once you're living here. We get it. Some of you need your US number for work, and it can make banking a lot easier. Speaking of communication, this next one is related, but in a different way. In Europe, English is the official language only in Ireland, Malta, UK, and Gibraltar. Although the Brits will insist they're not European, which confuses a lot of Americans. Geographically, to us, it's all Europe. So why does this matter? Because everywhere else, English is a second language, and that's where most Americans end up. Ease of communication drops when you're speaking English to a non-native speaker. You might need to simplify your sentences, slow down, or even adjust your accent to be understood. And then there's learning the local language, which can feel like a full-time job. A worthwhile one, mind you, but it's still a lot of work. The tricky part about operating in a foreign language is that it can take a long time to feel like yourself again. Often you end up taking on a slightly different character, like an actor in a play. And for some, that tension never fully goes away. Others never fully learn the host language and just operate in English. The struggle is real. Moving abroad isn't just switching countries. You're switching communication cultures, and that can feel way more complicated than you can imagine. Speaking of switching, let's switch to currencies. We need to talk about the financial and bureaucratic adjustments that come with moving from the US dollar to most likely the euro. You're going to have to sacrifice some currency control. Converting dollars into euros isn't a one-time deal. You'll likely be doing it multiple times across different years, and the exchange rate is never static. You'll gain some months, you'll lose others. When we moved to Spain, the euro to USD rate was around 1.4. In 2020, when we moved to Portugal, it was 1.22. And as of this recording, it's 1.15. Over the past 5 years, it's actually gone 1-to-1. As you can see, the swings can be pretty wild. That 1,000 euro rental could cost you just over $1,000 one month and $1,200 a year later. We use a couple of services to transfer money. The links are in the description section below. Budgeting can be tricky, and in some ways, you'll need to accept that you're at the mercy of the exchange rate. But let's say that you're earning locally in Europe, then some of that concern does go away. However, you may still be sacrificing salary. Monthly wages in Europe are often lower than the US, and upward mobility in the corporate world tends to move slower. Remote work can solve some of those issues, but not all. And whether you're working in person or remotely can affect how easily you integrate into local life. Then there's filing taxes. Now you're filing in 2 locations. Make sure you work with an accountant who understands expat taxes. Now we have a great one that we can introduce you to, and Kalie has a treasure trove of recommendations coming from viewers over the years. Email her at info@expatseverywhere.com. A solid accountant ensures that you're neither overpaying nor underpaying. In a nutshell, your financial life gets more complex before it gets simpler. Now this is one that gets talked about a lot, and it might even upset some of our European viewers. It broadly comes down to service culture and consumer expectations. Let me explain. The service industry across Europe is very different from North America. It's often slower, less performance-driven, and can take some getting used to. You might have to get out of your comfort zone and actively engage with a retail worker, because unlike in the US, they might not come up and ask you, "Can I help you with something?" Honestly, I love this. Sometimes I just want to be left alone so I can shop for a while. But the downside is sometimes you can't even find a worker. They're not out here hustling trying to sell you stuff. At service desks, unless it's a big international brand, you likely won't find a standardized, super efficient process to quickly handle your customer issues. And speaking of service desks, let's talk about returns. The idea of a no questions asked return policy is practically non-existent, and some returns can be painfully slow. And forget about availability and speed. Americans love instant gratification. In Europe, same-day Amazon delivery is a novelty, not the norm. Costco is here. Sorry, Sam's, where you at? But outlets are so few and far between that most of us aren't conveniently near one to take advantage of the memberships or benefits. Now, this one isn't a sacrifice. In fact, it's something that I've come to love about Europe and cringe a bit when I go back to the US. The tipping culture. Each country has its own approach, but none of them come close to the madness in America. 20% feels like the minimum in the US these days, while in Europe, 5 to 10% is standard, and 15% is considered generous. You will need to get familiar with the tipping culture of the country that you live in, and honestly, any country that you're gonna travel to. But trust me, it's okay to step out of your comfort zone here. You do not need to tip 20% everywhere. In fact, this is one sacrifice that actually might save you money. You're not losing, you're keeping. And speaking of keeping, if you want to keep our videos coming into your feed, hit the subscribe button and notification bell. That keeps us in business making videos like this one. Speaking of videos, here's the next one that you should watch to learn more about why we left the United States for Portugal. Until next time, let's get moving. Bye.